Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. This is episode 236. And I always do this, but I believe it's number 236. I should always do my research beforehand. But it's just Eric here today, and we have a special guest that's joining us. You may recognize her because we recently did a live interview with her husband, Matt Faircloth. This is Liz Faircloth joining us today. How you doing, Liz?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Eric?
I am doing well. It's a nice Friday morning. Life is good. Feeling good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great as well. On the mend. Family has been sick, so everyone's starting to feel better, which is good.
Yeah, that's always that time of year, right?
That's right.
Approaching winter, and everybody's got a runny nose and sneezing on each other, and it's just it's a fun time for everybody.
That's right.
So just to give a little bit of backstory, Liz, you grew up in a small town right outside of Flemington, New Jersey, and you graduated from Rowan University and also have a degree in psychology and then got a master's degree in social work from the University of Pennsylvania. Very impressive. And from reading your bio here, I'll let you kind of explain a little bit. How did you go from, going on this path of, getting a psychology degree to eventually getting into real estate? Tell us, eventually, how did that switch happen? What happened there?
Yeah, I get that question. I get that question often. So I was actually getting my degree in, my master's degree in social work at Penn, and University of Pennsylvania is actually one of the greatest grad degrees is Wharton, right? The Wharton School. Mm-hmm. So it's funny, the School of Social Work was this small little building, and then right next to it was this huge, beautiful building, which was the Wharton School, obviously, right? So yeah. I remember just thinking I really wanted to take an entrepreneurial class. So I said, I'm here. And I was able to do it. I didn't have to pay anything extra. You're already paying them enough money anyway. So I took an entrepreneur class during my, social work degree, which no one else was doing. But I just was really intrigued with just starting a business and, trying to do something on my own. So when I left and got my degree, I thought maybe I would do something where starting my own kind of social work related company. And then I met my husband. We started getting really intrigued with real estate investing. We started out actually learning about the power of real estate through playing the cash flow game, Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game. And it's an excellent game. I would highly recommend anyone that's never played it to pick it up. I think it's $100 or less, but it's literally like Monopoly on steroids. And it's just a great way to start really thinking about how do you do this. And it's just, the game's great. So anyway, that got us really intrigued. We read Rich Dad Poor Dad, of course, like everyone else. And we're kind of hooked and started taking courses. So we actually then kind of started our path in buying a duplex in outside of Philadelphia. And I kind of put aside my social work interests and really dived into real estate. And I said, well, maybe I can merge the two. And then we eventually started the DeRosa Group. And we we were still committed, but initially we really were okay, we can buy property and try to help the community as well. That was our goal at first, but we've tried to do that and we have done that, but it's a hard, it's a big one when you're really shifting a community and a building. It's one thing to shift a building and it's a whole other thing to do a community. And I think we've done a good job, very good job at that in our, one of the main areas we invest in, which is Trenton, New Jersey.
Do you find to do that you have to kind of, I'm assuming that your properties aren't super far apart in Trenton then, if you're trying to flip an entire community. So I have kind of two questions. Are you strategically buying properties close to one another because you might be able to affect the real estate in that area?
Yeah, that's exactly. So when we started doing stuff in Trenton, we didn't do that. So, we're okay, well, we can buy where can we buy properties that are, then we shifted our focus because, if you're really trying, you can affect a community one property at a time in different parts of that community, but it certainly is going to take a lot longer. So we then shifted and said, okay, we actually started, raising private money and we put one fund together. We're actually focused around the train station in Trenton. Mm-hmm. So it's one of our funds where it's a scattered site, duplexes, triplexes, mostly small multis. And we literally took property by property, and we probably have at least I would say 15 properties of multifamilies around the train station. And we're also working on a development in that very area. So that is really, really shifting the community. Two of the properties we renovated are right on the main fairway. One was a board up. Now it's like, it's a commercial space. The other one was a board up. Now is a commercial space with a, rental above it. So yeah, to make a real difference, you got to do that. So we did that there. And the other area we did that was where our office building is, on Main Street of Trenton. And we bought our office building, one of our first investments, and then most recently bought two other big buildings on that block. Wow. We just renovated one, and it was a board up, now has a pharmacy in there, beautiful pharmacy, and has three big loft style apartments. And then we're doing the same thing on the other side of the building on our block. So that's kind of 2019. So
a question that I have, just to kind of take it back a little bit. So I would think it would be very hard, given your level of education, to make the leap to just go into real estate full time. Like, what was the mental process on that? Because like my wife was spent years and years in school, and we've talked before, like, could she ever leave her career, what she's doing now, just because you feel so pot committed on it?
Well, it's a good point. So what's interesting is that when my husband and I started investing together, which was 2005 is when we really, started the DeRosa Group, kind of like, I think we bought our first duplex in 2004, but really got going on in 2005. The same month that we got married, my husband quit his job.
Okay.
So yeah, talk about good timing. No,
you guys really talked about it though, right?
Yeah, we did. It wasn't like
came home. He's like, I quit. Just wanted you to know.
Yay! Congratulations.
A month after we got married, just to make sure things were good.
Yeah. So we did. We kind of strategically planned it. And what I did though is at that time I was consulting. I was doing consulting work. So when I left Penn, I actually didn't get a social. I never actually have worked in social work. I ended up getting a job doing kind of like team building and team, all the soft skill trainings for companies. So I worked for a consulting company, and I was working there. And my husband said, why don't I quit my job and, take this thing on full time, and you keep doing what you're doing. So, we definitely at least have one mortgage, our mortgage payment, paid. And it was just him and I. We had no kids yet. Mm-hmm. So I said, great, let's do it. So that's kind of what we did. I had a hand in our business, but he was the kind of day-to-day operator early on.
Okay.
Kind of taking it on. So my mental shift happened a lot later because I did end up leaving my job and my work. And it's interesting you say that, because in 2008, I ended up quitting and saying, okay, I'm leaving. And my boss was great. She said, no problem. If you ever want to come back, please do. So I took, went full time with my husband. And the first time we worked together, it was complete disaster. My husband, I say this in blog posts, but like my husband said to me, he's like, if we don't change something, we will get a divorce. And, so many things we were doing wrong. Right. So I was doing like administrative work. I was like putting the furniture together in the office building, like every role that like you could think of that was completely not aligned with my like brain and my strengths.
You're a team builder, put together the furniture.
Yeah. I mean, it was just like, and I teach people how to like use strengths. This is what I used to do, Eric, in my consulting work. And here I am.
As I say, not as I do.
That is the truth. Yeah. Words to live by. But it's really when you have a small business, you really have to watch, because you can end up doing everything because everything needs to be done. Right. So, you have to really, and neither of us had like entrepreneurial experience. So you kind of like growing up as you're building your business, growing up as a business owner, I should say. Mm-hmm. So, to answer your question, the mental shift happened most, really happened when second time I went back to my old job. I stopped working with my husband at that point. 2010, I ended up going back to my old work. My boss took me back gladly. I said, Matt, this isn't working. I can stay in the business kind of strategically. I just can't work. I can't do this full time with you. This isn't working. So I ended up going back, and then I left again for the last time when I had my son in 2013. And I came back to working with my husband more on a part-time basis or more like on a, strategic basis. And this time I was able to really kind of focus more on things my strengths. And so I was able to combine what I was doing in my consulting work and my using my brain and all those sort of things. So we've been doing it right, or better, I should say.
Would you say how much of doing it better that second time around had to deal with learning from your past mistakes versus like maybe the business being a little bit more established and you guys being more established as a couple and being able to like work through things?
Both. Yeah, both. Yeah. I mean, and the first time we worked together financially, it was stressful, right? So, here we are with a small portfolio. I think we had about 30 units at the time. No, those were not paid in full. I mean, those are we had no mortgage on those, that'd be different, but that wasn't the case.
I'm sure some of our listeners are like, yeah, small portfolio of 30 units. That's
no. And I mean that we paid too much for some of these properties.
Yeah.
A little bit over leveraged on these properties. That's what I mean. They weren't, when you buy properties initially an investor, you pay too much, you spend too much, you don't do you don't know your expenses as well as you do as you continue, all those sort of things. So what ended up happening though, and we weren't living on that, we weren't actually taking payment from that. So we were also flipping property.
Okay.
And, and it was just stressful. Like you're trying to pay yourself, you're trying to take care of the business. And it was just him and I, and we weren't living over our means, which was great. And we had savings. So I said, well, worst comes to worst. We plow through our savings. I go back to doing what I was doing. That's what we did, but that's okay. Cause then the second time around I came back, we were more financially sound as a business, which was good. We grew as a business, but more importantly, I was able to say, okay, what's my role and how do we best work together? And, so we don't step on each other's toes. And I had to do a lot of personal growth too, Eric. I mean, working with your spouse is like doing anything with your spouse. Your hot buttons. And when I get stressed, I tend to micromanage. That's just one of my many things that I need to work on. So what was happening was I was like totally micromanaging my husband, which is literally the worst thing you could do with your spouse, let alone a man. So I just wasn't working and I really needed to work through that and get better with that. So I did weekends and did my own kind of like personal development to get better with that. And I've gotten better with that. I'm really much better with that.
So when you say you did weekends, is that like where you went to like a seminar that was like a conference or something? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of them in particular was if you've ever heard of the Landmark Forum, and it's, I think it was started in California, but they have forums everywhere. And my husband and I went to it together and our communication and we're both pretty good communicators, but when you're working together, you can't be good. You have to actually be exceptional. Like that's how, as communicators, and if you're working together and actually trying to build a business together, you actually have to be exceptional at communicating. It can't even be average. And that's what we did. We went to this course and it was just eye-opening, and it was life eye-opening, of course, like, really brings you back to how you become who you are and, like deep stuff, not everyone's willing to go there, but, him and I always kind of like personal development kind of things. So we were open to it and we worked through our stuff through that. And then we continued on doing that, talking about stuff and, all that sort of thing.
Well, the thing that I find interesting about that, I don't remember where I heard this before, but I was listening to somebody who was talking about, getting coaching, whether it be relationship advice or investing or anything like that. And this person was specifically talking about relationships. And they said, I always encourage like everybody to go and get some sort of coaching or mentorship or something, because he made the point that when you're like completely on the rocks, like you're about to like serve papers, it's really hard to make that incremental gain. Because you're already kind of like so like button heads at that point. But if you're already in a solid relationship and you're willing to get that kind of relationship advice and go through that process, that the gains that you can make are like exponential versus somebody who's like really on the rocks.
It's a great point.
Yeah. So going forward from here, you guys started out when you were saying the first time you were at like maybe 30 properties, you come back, you join Matt, you guys are working together. Are you part-time when you started? For the second time around, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I had my son, 2013, I kind of decided to at that point I was traveling a ton with my work, and I was doing very well with my consulting work. I enjoyed it. It was, I learned a ton. I was able to give a ton to the companies I was working with, but I was traveling a ton.
Mhm.
So I was it's fun when I didn't have kids. I mean, I was traveling to all these different cool places and, just awesome. But not when you have kids, it becomes a little different. So I decided, and I did it for 10 years on and off, but for 10 years plus. And I'm like, I mastered this. I'm good. I'm good with this. It's kind of like you feel like you're in Groundhog's Day. Like, okay, I'm just doing the same thing over and over, rinse and repeat. So I said, I think it's time. I think it's time to shift. So as I stay home with my, my newborn, I'm really going to start to figure out what my next phase is, and I can get back into helping our company, get to the next level as well.
Okay. Where are you guys currently at, in case somebody's not familiar with the DeRosa Group? Like, what's your portfolio looking like these days?
Sure. So we're based in, like I said, Trenton, New Jersey. We started there, locally investing. We have 100 plus units in kind of like the New Jersey market. And then, the last few years, we've been growing kind of outside our market. And we have doing the math here. So we have about 350 units right now, and we're about to close on another 177 unit building. So we'll be close to 500 hopefully by the end of the year. We're supposed to close in December of this year.
How are the nerves with such a big property? I mean, that's a pretty big addition to the portfolio. Yeah.
So our largest to date was a 200 unit last year.
Okay.
And then, this new project, it's interesting. It's you're raising more money, and that's my husband's kind of like specialty, and that's what he focuses his energies on. So the number kind of keeps going up as we get into different projects. He's raising more money, and he's always able to meet it, which is really cool. And it's something to that's a strength of his. But yeah, it's exciting. This is a new project in Kentucky, and the team just keeps getting better, and it's good. It's like you keep learning and growing. But what's neat is that I always say to people, if they want to get into apartment buildings, it's really important to know what you're doing, obviously. But we started with duplexes, and we still buy duplexes and smaller multis. It's not like we don't. We actually like both strategies, because when you buy bigger stuff, it takes time to turn it around. So you're actually not. It's not like, oh, you get your, passive income. I'm going to get all this money day one. No, that's not how it works. Especially if you buy a value add building. And most of the buildings you want to be value add, because then you're able to, bring investors in and all those sort of things. I mean, if you have your own cash and just you're sitting on tons of money, and just go buy an asset that's already performing, that makes complete sense. But that's not the strategy we do. So
getting back to the, I don't want to get too much into private capital, because I know I talked with your husband quite a bit about that. And the anybody who missed it, that's one of the live video interviews we did on our Facebook page. But have you found, I've never raised any private capital, but I used to work in an advertising agency, and I found that sometimes the smaller clients with the smallest budgets tended to be some of the bigger pains in the butt. Have you guys found, as you're elevating with what you're doing with private capital and getting probably larger investors in, is it a different type of dynamic between you guys and the investors that maybe have a little bit more of a bankroll?
It's funny. We still like a lot of the investors for our deal last year, the 200 unit deal, I'd say we had 35 investors. So we have a lot of investors that are putting in. Our minimum was $100,000, but we had people who put in 50. I think we had people who put in 25. So we have a lot of just, whether it's, in that realm, or we had a couple people who put in, 500,000. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixture of people, which is cool. And they're investing with their own money. They're investing with their IRAs. They're investing in various ways. So, but yeah, as we continue on, the sophistication, I think, gets into when you start to deal with companies and you start to deal with all those private equity groups and things. We're not in that just yet, or even if you start to do crowdfunding and you start raising money that way, all those sort of things. So we're not there yet. We're doing it more, kind of like I don't know if they call it mom and pop. I don't know what the term is really, but where you're focused on kind of like the expanded group of people that know you and like you and respect you kind of thing.
Okay. So a question about, we talked a little bit about DeRosa Group, but we really haven't talked much yet about your podcast. So for anybody wondering what that is, that's the Real Estate Invest Her show. So invest and then HER. I wanted to talk about that because obviously your show is catered towards women. Why did you want to get involved in this? I mean, was there something specifically as far as investing that you thought like women were underserved, or like what was your thinking and philosophy behind that?
Sure. So, it's interesting. My partner in this, her name is Andressa. Her and I were having coffee, and we have partnered together on various projects, flipping properties as well as new construction projects, mostly in the Philly area. And she helps us quite a bit in Trenton. Her specialty is construction management. Okay. But anyway, we're meeting together just on a few different business items and things, and having coffee. And it's funny because it came up. We're like, how cool would it be to get other people, kind of like the support they need, because we were supporting each other. But not everyone has that, right? Not everyone has that kind of camaraderie, especially with another female in this business, because sometimes it gets a little lonely, especially in the investing side, because dealing with contractors, especially, things like that. So we were just like, wouldn't it be cool to like start a podcast? And we just started talking about it. We're like, and more importantly, we said, wouldn't it be neat to give women the support they need in this business, since we may not have gotten that when we started, or, I've always been kind of like, oh, you're Matt's wife, people think like I just kind of came along on the ride of the DeRosa Group. But honestly, all of this, like, it was more like I was always the initiator at the beginning, and, it was just kind of funny as I talk to people, like,
what's it like being married to such a great real estate?
Yeah, I know. Like, I don't know anything, but regardless,
do you know him well?
Yeah, I know, right? But that's okay. I know what I know, and that it's cool. But
so I think it sounds like you don't get hung up on that type of stuff, right? You just kind of breeze by it. But I would think that for our female listeners that are listening to this podcast, if they're trying to get into like private capital or different situations where they feel like they're not being taken seriously just because of sex, like, do you have any tips or anything that you've kind of learned over the years that's worked well for you, or just at least mindset?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and that is a frustration though. Sometimes people often will, I haven't gotten it directly, but I have had contractors speak to me kind of like I don't know anything. And, when it comes to the contracting side, I know a bit, but I wouldn't say I know as much as Andressa. And Andressa runs a lot of our construction projects. And she's had contractors say to her, why don't you run this by your husband? And she's like, I make all the decisions. I'm the construction manager. I'm not running this by it, So, people think that stuff doesn't happen. It does happen now. So, yeah, I mean, and I've gotten dismissed lots of different ways in a lot of different circumstances. I used to work with CEOs of companies in my consulting days, and people were like, oh, are you here to, I'm like, no, I'm here to meet the CEO. I'm helping their company. They're like, what? I'm like, and I was in my 20s, But anyway, I mean, suggestions, yes. I mean, I think women are poised to be phenomenal investors, and I don't think enough of them are. So that's my first point. The second point is that I think what we've done, and we're in 43 episodes, and one of our interviews, Carol, her name is, I think it was her interview, it was great. And we talked a lot about why that is. Why is men more involved in investing than women? Because that's a good question to ask, because it is the case. It's like a 70-30, even less probably than that split. Wow. So, I mean, if you go on like Bigger Pockets or our YouTube page or any of these sites, membership is usually like 85 to 15.
Yeah.
15% women, 85% men.
You must find that pretty interesting to have that data on your guys' YouTube channel at the DeRosa Group.
Oh, I love looking at that. And I'm like, my goal is to just increase the amount of women watching so I'm trying to put more of our investor stuff there too. But what's fascinating, I think, in this conversations I've had with really successful women in this business, because we interview only women that have been successful in this business or who are growing their portfolios, is that women tend to be more cautious. Mm-hmm. Again, total generalization, but it does seem to be a thread that runs through. Like when women make a decision on something, they go for it, but they can tend to be cautious.
So they'll do their research probably a little bit more.
Yeah. And so what's interesting though, is that we were like, why don't we create more of a community? So we created a Facebook group. We have 500 plus members in that group, and people are like,
you got to plug it. What's it called?
Oh, it's called the Invest Her Community. So
Okay.
yeah, if you just go to Facebook, Invest Her Community. Yeah, I'm not good at plugging things. I'm like.
Well,
really
I'll tell you what. I think we're Facebook friends. I'm going to post this video version of our podcast too in the Facebook group. So if somebody doesn't remember it, hopefully they see it in the Facebook group at Rent Prep for Landlords as well. So
awesome.
I'll link over to that.
But what's really cool about it is that when what we talked about through is that, if women are cautious, or what have you, and they're at a meeting, right? And they're like one of 2 females in a group of 30 men. What are the chances of people just raising their hand and saying, hey, it's a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you're talking about and you don't want to look like a moron. I mean, who doesn't, it makes sense that people are a little kind of cautious. So by creating kind of like a women focused group, it's not to say we don't love men or men aren't awesome. I mean, I love my husband. I love men. They're great. But to create like a community that can support each other in a little more of a safe way, that's our goal. And then they can go to the conferences and the meetings with men and go to those meetings. Go to, like, you're going to have partners that are men, of course, and team members, and they're great. And it's so important. I'm not saying just partner with women and talk to women only. That's not our philosophy. That's not what we're up to. What we are up to is helping give women the confidence to do what they need to do for their families. And because women are staying home or shifting from, traveling. So many women I talked to started getting into this business because they had kids and they didn't want to travel for work. So many of the interviews, women we interviewed that came out today. Mm-hmm. So I guess the point is to know what you're fearful of, know what's stopping you, or start to explore that, and then start to get into a community with women that can support you. I think that would be huge. Or get into a community. If you want to be in a community with men that support you, awesome, whatever works for you. But I find women I've talked to really are appreciating the women camaraderie because they feel a little safer. I don't know how else to say it. They just do.
Well, I mean, it's just got to be like, I could join that group and I wouldn't really understand what you guys are talking about because I don't have that life perspective. I don't view things through that same lens.
That's right.
I know, like, my wife has told me things over the years that have happened to her, and I was like, get out of here. Like, that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen.
How am I supposed to know? Because that stuff has never happened to me.
Sure.
Like, I'll never know what it's like to walk into a room, anything besides being a really tall, bald white guy.
Right. That's right.
One of the things you're talking about too that reminded me of a movie I was watching. I want to say maybe it was a Michael Moore movie. It was like something about like being the U.S. being the best or something. But one of the parts of the movie was talking, and I'm horrible at remembering facts, and I'm sure our listeners already are well aware of that. But I want to say it was either Finland. I'll go with Finland, but they had
I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
they had a financial meltdown.
Yeah.
And they just pretty much said, we're done with men leading the finances of this country. We're going to let women run the show. And after that happened, and, maybe in the show notes, I'll correct myself on what country it actually was. The finances of this country were just like incredible. And the reason they saw was because men, it was more of like an ego driven decision. A lot of times when you're making a decision, because you tend to overcompensate, or maybe you're too confident in your skills and your abilities. So you're like, oh, I got this, where women were more cautious, like you were saying. And they started making just more prudent decisions financially and just turned the entire country's financial situation around. And I heard that. I was like, that's incredible. Like, I don't know. It's just like,
I gotta look more into that. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. That'd be great content for your podcast.
Yeah. I got to get the leader of that. Maybe it was like I don't know if they call them presidents, but that'd be so cool to get the president of Finland on our podcast.
Oh, yeah.
How did you turn around the country with the financial? That's a good lesson.
So I think that sometimes people like shy away from stereotypes because the word stereotype itself has a negative connotation to it, because you're just like immediately bad. But in some situations, it's like there are stereotypes that are there because they're true. So, and you being a female investor, you even said it yourself that maybe women are more cautious. And maybe being able to be like honest with yourself and see where that might be, an opportunity rather than a detriment. And I think sometimes people just get caught up in the fact that stereotypes are always just categorized as like a bad, horrible thing.
Yeah.
I think that there's opportunities to grow within yourself, just because you might know some of those stereotypes and maybe people are looking at you a little bit differently or listening differently, but you might have an edge because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, we really are, we like to say we're on a mission, because we really feel like called to, help other women, get into this business, but also grow what they're up to. Like we have women in this group that are probably, totally financially independent from real estate. And we have women who have never done anything and they're helping each other. And I think that's really cool. And that's what it's really about, and I think that's most important because I have something to give. I can help women get involved in rentals and the things that we've done. There are things that I'm learning and that I don't do as well as I want to do. So there's always something someone can get. And I think there's always something someone can give. And that's the kind of community we're creating. So
that's awesome. So anybody who's still listening right now, and I'm sure you are, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Liz, check her out you have a few different resources, DeRosaGroup.com, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So DEROSA group.com. I know you guys have a newsletter over there. You guys have a YouTube channel. You got a bunch of resources. One of the things that I think is really awesome is you guys have some community initiatives that you share on your website so people can check those out. And then, of course, we were mentioning the Real Estate Invest Her Show. That's a podcast you guys can check out. So you can find that on iTunes, I'm sure, and anywhere else, right?
Yep. Yeah, the website's therealestateinvesther.com. And right on there, you could check out all of our episodes and kind of who Andres and I are. And also you can click there to join the Invest Her community on the Facebook group.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated it.
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.